A beautiful outdoor wedding unfolds with laughter, music and dancing until flashing red and blue lights cut through the joy. The celebration comes to a sudden halt as police cars pull up, summoned by a white neighbor who smugly insists the gathering is too loud and suspicious. The guests fall into silence, the once vibrant atmosphere replaced with fear, confusion, and simmering anger. The bride clutches her white dress tightly, her eyes wide with disbelief, while whispers ripple across the crowd. The officers step forward, tension rising in the air, but suddenly freeze as their eyes lock on the groom. In that instant, the smug certainty on the neighbor's face begins to crack. The power dynamics shift in a heartbeat, leaving everyone breathless, waiting to see what comes next. What would you do if the happiest day of your life was turned into a moment of public humiliation? Marcus stood tall in his mid-40s, a man of calm presence and quiet authority. As the police chief of the city, he carried a reputation built on fairness, discipline, and integrity. His community admired him not only for the badge he wore, but for the respect he gave to every individual, regardless of status. At his side was Alana, his bride, glowing with joy. A devoted school teacher, she was beloved by her students and neighbors, known for her kindness and warmth. Their union was not just about two people joining lives, but a celebration for an entire community that respected and cherished them both. The park was filled with vibrant decorations, flowers lining the walkways, tables heavy with food, music playing softly beneath the laughter of children. Elders sat smiling, families danced, and the atmosphere radiated unity. It was a rare day of happiness, where everyone felt a part of something bigger than themselves. Across the street, Elaine watched from her porch. A woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and bitter. She had long resented gatherings that were not under her control. To her, joy that didn't revolve around her permission was an offense. Scowling, she gripped her phone, muttering about disturbances and rules being broken. In her mind, her word was law, and today she was determined to prove it. Elaine dialed the police with a sharp tone, her voice heavy with disdain. She spoke of rowdy strangers filling the park, of suspicious gatherings, of noise that she called unbearable. Her words carried venom, carefully chosen to cast an innocent wedding as something dangerous. She ended the call with satisfaction, certain that her complaint would bring the peace she believed she owned. Moments later, the joy of the wedding shattered. Sirens pierced the laughter, flashing red and blue lights washed over the flowers and decorations. Guests froze. Children clung to their parents, crying in fear. Elders whispered, confusion written on their faces. The music stopped, replaced by the heavy sound of boots on grass as officers entered the park. Elaine stepped out from her porch with smug pride, her arms folded as if she had won a battle. She believed this was her victory, that her call had restored order. Guests turned to see her smirk, and the bitterness in her eyes told them everything. They had never been welcome in her sight. The officers began questioning guests one by one. Their tone was cold, their suspicion clear. Families celebrating love were treated as if they were criminals. A young boy asked why the police were there, his mother pulling him close with no answer to give. Alana stood frozen in her white dress, her hands shaking. The insult cut deep. Her wedding day had turned into a public trial. Marcus stood at her side, calm, silent, his eyes fixed on the scene. His uniform was not yet revealed, but his presence carried weight. He measured every word, every move, waiting. Would you have stayed silent or stood up in that moment of humiliation? Elaine's voice rose above the uneasy murmurs of the crowd. She pointed toward the decorated park, her words sharp and dripping with disdain. She declared that this wedding did not belong here, that the park was being misused, that the noise was unbearable. She spoke as if she were the rightful guardian of the neighborhood, as though her judgment was the only one that mattered. Guests tried to reason with the officers, explaining that permits had been secured and that this was a legal celebration. But each attempt was cut short. The officers barely listened, their questions laced with suspicion rather than fairness. A grandmother in her Sunday best lowered her eyes, her hands trembling as she tried to comfort a crying child. The laughter and warmth of minutes before now hung heavy with fear and disbelief. Alana's chest tightened as tears threatened to fall. Her once glowing smile dimmed under the weight of humiliation. Yet beside her, Marcus leaned closer, whispering soft words of reassurance, his calm, steady voice wrapped around her like a shield. His hand on hers did not tremble. Silence was not weakness. but a quiet storm waiting to rise. Elaine smirked as she watched the officers treat the guests like trespassers. She stepped closer, lowering her voice but not her venom. To one officer, she muttered that people like them should know their place, her tone soaked in arrogance. The words landed like poison, unseen by most, but sharp enough to sting. The crowd held its breath, unsure of what would happen next. Fear had mixed with anger, and beneath it all, a spark of resilience was beginning to form. Elaine's arrogance clashed with Marcus's dignity, and the air grew heavier with suspense. When arrogance meets dignity, who do you think will win? The officers moved deeper into the crowd, their tone sharp, demanding identification from every guest, as though this wedding were a crime scene. Men reached into their wallets with shaking hands. Mothers clutched their purses tightly and children hid behind their parents. The joy of a wedding had been twisted into a public interrogation. Elaine stood nearby, her arms crossed and a satisfied smile stretching across her face. Each uneasy glance, each trembling hand seemed to feed her sense of victory. Lana's father stepped forward, his voice strong and filled with years of dignity. He demanded that Elaine show respect, that she stop humiliating his family on this sacred day. Elaine turned to him, her lips curling in disdain. She dismissed him with a wave of her hand, as though his words carried no weight. The insult hung heavy, cutting deeper than any raised voice. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm yet firm. He told Elaine that she had gone far enough, that this intrusion was an abuse. His words carried no anger, only controlled authority. But Elaine only laughed, her arrogance flaring. She claimed that she knew people in power, that no one could challenge her word in this neighborhood. For a moment, the officers faltered. They looked at Marcus differently now, sensing that his steady composure was not ordinary. He stood tall, unshaken, while everyone else seemed to crumble under the weight of the humiliation. His calm presence unsettled them, though they could not yet understand why. The tension was suffocating. Guests whispered in fear, torn between protecting their dignity and avoiding further conflict. The bride's hand shook as she held onto Marcus, silently pleading for an end to this nightmare. If your dignity was crushed in front of family and friends, would you endure it or reveal who you are? Marcus moved forward with deliberate steps, his calm composure now transformed into a commanding presence. The murmurs died, the tension sharpened. All eyes followed him as he reached into his jacket. Slowly, he revealed a polished badge that glinted in the sunlight. Sight of its silenced the officers mid-question. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd like fire. Guests leaned into one another, their voices hushed yet urgent. He is the police chief. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her face drained of color, the power she clung to slipping through her grasp. For the first time she looked small, exposed, her arrogance folding under the weight of truth. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His words were precise, firm, and carried the weight of authority. He cited the law, explaining proper procedure, reminding the officers of their oath. Each sentence landed like a strike, exposing their misconduct without anger, only undeniable truth. The air shifted. The crowd no longer felt hunted. It was Elaine who now stood under the harsh spotlight of accountability. The same police she had called upon for her amusement now seemed unsure, caught between duty and shame. The tension reached its peak. The balance of power had flipped, but the confrontation was not yet finished. Justice hovered, close enough to taste yet waiting for the final blow. Who truly stood in danger now, the joyful wedding party or the neighbor who had tried to destroy it? Marcus's voice cut through the tense silence like steel. He ordered the officers to step back immediately, to stop harassing the guests. His tone carried authority that could not be questioned, leaving no room for hesitation. The officers obeyed, their heads lowered, their earlier confidence gone. Elaine rushed forward, her words sharp and frantic. She tried to spin the story, insisting she was only protecting the neighborhood, that the wedding was illegal and disruptive. But Marcus stood firm. With calm precision, he dismantled her lies, pointing to the permits on record, the approval granted, and the flawless legality of the gathering. Each fact he revealed tightened the grip of shame around Elaine's crumbling pride. Neighbors who had been watching from their porches now stood silently, witnessing the downfall of the woman who had stirred fear and chaos. The authority she once assumed vanished, replaced by humiliation. Elaine's smirk disappeared. She stood alone, stripped of her arrogance, her words hollow in the face of truth. Marcus turned to her, his eyes unwavering, his words sharp but measured. Abuse of power and hate only lead to disgrace. The sentence rang out, heavy and undeniable, echoing across the park. The officers confirmed what Marcus had already stated. The wedding was legal, the permits were filed, and no laws were broken. The tension that had strangled the celebration dissolved. Guests erupted in cheers, their voices filled with relief and pride. Children laughed again, elders smiled, and music began to rise once more. Elaine shrank back into the shadows, invisible now where once she had sought control. The wedding, threatened by prejudice and arrogance, resumed with greater strength than before. The love binding Marcus and Alana stood taller than ever, crowned by the justice that had just unfolded. Justice was not only clear, it was deeply felt, leaving the crowd uplifted, united, and satisfied. Calm returned to the park as the music rose once more. Marcus and Alana exchanged a look of love and triumph, their bond shining stronger than ever. Their wedding continued with dignity, untouched now by fear or humiliation. Guests danced, children played, and elders smiled, knowing they had witnessed more than a marriage. They had witnessed justice. Elaine could no longer hide. Neighbors whispered, their eyes cold with disapproval. Her reputation collapsed in the same moment she tried to destroy another's joy. Police documented her false report, ensuring her prejudice would not be forgotten. What she intended as power ended as shame. The lesson was clear. Strength paired with dignity can dismantle arrogance. Love and unity can stand taller than prejudice and hate. Justice was delivered, joy endured, and a wedding once threatened became a celebration no one would ever forget. Justice was served, but if you were in Marcus's place, what would you have done when the police arrived?